build affinity and trust. That's how relationships are built. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another Relationship-Led Growth Live. I am here with our head of marketing ops analytics, Jon Piehl. Jon, welcome.
Hey,
welcome
thanks,
back.
Mike.
I should say. I think you've done one or two of these.
Yeah, at least
a
one
while ago. So,
Mhm.
We've got a packed agenda, if you will, for today. And it's a hot topic. I've talked about this with a number of people recently, and I know a lot of people are likely struggling with it. So, first of all, to set the stage, how does measurement relate to relationships? Well, if you've been following our frameworks and things like that, you know that you need to be able to measure and prove out value of said relationships. So, any way you slice it, you've got to be able to show that value, which is what we're going to talk about today. Overall, here's what I've been seeing and hearing through a bunch of my conversations with CEOs and marketing leaders over the last, I'll say 3 to 6 months here. And there's a very clear pattern, which is there's a lot of pressure. Now, this happens every single economic downturn, right? When capital gets tight, when budgets get tight, and there's always more pressure from finance teams on marketing and sales teams to prove value, hit numbers, all that kind of fun stuff. That happens all the time. This time it feels different. There are a couple of very specific, I think, trends happening that are layered on top of the economic environment that are causing the situation we're in. One clear one is, I think, CEOs and CFOs and finance teams in general are kind of fed up with not being, taken seriously, if you will, I think. There's always been a requirement or an ask of marketing to prove out value. And I think pretty consistently, marketing teams do the same thing, which doesn't really prove out value. And we'll talk about how things need to change. And I think there's just all this pent up frustration, and it's finally coming to a head this time around. On top of that, you also have, I think, efficiency pressures that are being created by all the technology advancements right now with generative AI specifically, but other automation and all sorts of analytics tools and data being available and all this stuff. I think there's this extra pressure of doing more with less, which I hate that phrase. Like, I think in general, that's what you should, in general, as a business, always be doing. Like, you should always be trying to drive better efficiency, which means doing more with less, but we're not going to get into that. Long story short, the three things: economic situation that we've got going on right now, capital being tighter. That always happens. On top of that, you have this pent up frustration over the last, say 10 years, especially in B2B. And add to that the pressures of having to be more efficient. And here we are. So that's the situation we are in. And we're seeing, again, CFOs really coming down hard. And if they haven't yet, guarantee you they will be in this next budget planning cycle that companies are going to start entering into in the next few months, if they haven't already. So, Jon, that's what we're chatting about today, right? Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to start off with, how does a marketer start thinking like a CFO? I think there are a couple of very specific things that we as marketers need to start doing that we haven't been. I'll mention one, and then Jon, I know you've got a number of things you want to jump into. So the first one, I think it's probably the most important, especially for in the downturn type of environment. It doesn't matter whether you're VC backed or PE backed or bootstrapped or founder led. And this is something I generally don't hear marketers talk about, but it's even more important in these like bootstrapped or founder led, owner led companies. But it's, how does the marketing strategy, the investment being put in front of finance, how is that going to impact cash flow? So as a marketer, you need to understand what the cash position of the business is before you go and present a whole bunch of stuff, right? You need to understand your sales cycle length and how, in general, how long it takes to bring in a new customer and the customer acquisition cost, and then put that up against your cash flow projections and existing cash position and say, okay, is this plan even feasible with the cash that we currently have and the cash projections that we currently have? That's a conversation that I don't often hear and see marketing having, and they absolutely have to. So that's the main one I want to mention. John, I'll let you talk about a few of these other ones.
Yeah, so if we try to get into the head of a CFO, we ask, what are they looking for? One of the overarching problems they're trying to solve is, how do I allocate this fixed budget to maximize revenue and profits? They are not just looking at the marketing budget, they're looking at every single department's budget. And so they want to know how they can allocate that. And so part of marketing's job is to explain the efficiency of, if you allocate this money towards marketing, this is what we will produce for you, the results that we'll give. So that leads to the next question that they're going to ask is, what are the specific business results that marketing is going to produce with the budget that I give them? Because they could easily just give that budget to sales or any other department to try to maximize revenue. So it's really important to set expectations and tell a really good story as to how marketing plans to produce business results, and then after the fact, explain how they did. Mike, you want to talk a little bit about the marketing strategies that we implement here at Proofpoint and how they're kind of difficult to pinpoint back to revenue specifically?
Yeah, and even before I get into that, one thing, John, that you just mentioned, I think is worth pointing out is there's, especially in larger organizations, there's always this battle for budget. Mm-hmm. And I think that's another place where marketers really need to think more like a CFO, think more like the head of the business as a whole, because it might be better to take a chunk of what you were planning for marketing and invest it in R&D, for example. It might be better to invest it in, headcount in other places. It might be better, like there might be a better use of said budget for the business. And I think those conversations, and again, that's not just on marketers. Obviously, that's up to the executives to facilitate those types of conversations and ensure that everyone, all business unit leaders are on the same page. But I think marketing leaders do need to be able to have that conversation and understand overarching business strategy and impacts and all that kind of fun stuff. As far as strategies, John, you asked about, let me kind of set the stage maybe first, which is, here's a typical conversation I end up having with CEOs. And a lot of these people are in what we'll call technical professional services businesses. Again, that might be commercial construction, that might be biotech consulting, that might be other, IoT consulting practices, technology, whatever, like those types of businesses. It's not, we don't deal with a lot of product companies, not none, but not as many. So I want to set the stage there for a minute. And the typical conversation that I'll often have is, they'll come to us with, hey, we need to do paid search or paid media or SEO, or we need more content and white papers or whatever, some very specific tactical thing. And I will say, great, that sounds good. How do you generally get business right now? Where does revenue come from? And almost all the time, the answer is, well, it's some form of relationships. It's referrals, it's past customers, it's whatever. So really, generally, what it ends up being is a combination of what I'll call reputation-led and sales-led motions, networking-led motions, one-on-one. And then we'll talk about, well, how do these two things marry up? Because what you're talking about is very transactional, lead gen type things. This is very relationship driven, personalized, etc. These don't really mesh. So the situation that's often happening in the back end is the company has gotten to a point where they've plateaued. The growth has plateaued. They've done this relationship or this reputation-led thing. They've gotten referrals from customers. They've gotten referrals from maybe even some past customers and maybe employees ad hoc here and there. They've never operationalized any of it. They've got salespeople or managing directors that are doing sales and they're doing one-on-one relationship building. But that's gotten them to a point where really they're just replacing natural churn that exists in that type of business. And they're no longer growing, or they're growing at a very, very slow pace. Then they start going, okay, we got to do all this other stuff. They start pivoting over and over again because things aren't working right. They'll go, oh, we got to do LinkedIn, and they go to LinkedIn lead gen, or well, we got to create a LinkedIn company page. They'll start doing LinkedIn organic, or we got to do SEO, and they'll do, fluffy, XYZ industry 101 type stuff that nobody really needs, and they'll rank for things they'll never convert, all those types of activities. And they keep pivoting from one to the other because they're not seeing results. And then they get into this whole cycle of an unsustainable and unscalable growth model, right? Because number one, unit economics generally suck, and they start getting worse and worse over time because you're investing more and more in paid media to do, again, lead gen type activity, where in reality, you're not actually taking any steps to build relationships. So it just keeps spiraling out of control. So, John, your question is, what do we do that's different? And again, this is Relationship-Led Growth Live. So we really focus on building relationships at scale with the right people to drive revenue. So that obviously, yes, that's direct decision makers. It could be internal influencers, it could be external influencers, it could be maximizing your internal employee base to activate the personal brands and drive conversations. It could be leveraging your recruiting pipeline and your culture to build more affinity and drive conversations. It could be partners, with the formal or informal partnerships, co-marketing opportunities, like all these types of things, but tied together into a flywheel that is all interconnected, that drives incremental and scalable referrals. The reason those things are hard to measure is because the tactics are ones that we've all kind of seen out there, right? It's things like podcasts. It's things like doing live events. It's things like running, a lot of ungated content. Doesn't mean everything is ungated, but a lot of it is ungated. And the big one that I think is often missed in the types of businesses that we're often dealing with is it's not as much like website-based inbound. But what marketing is actually doing is enabling better outbound. And then personal brand-based inbound. So you're not going to get, like, if you're running a consulting firm in whatever, the cybersecurity space, you're not going to get a ton of form submits from CTOs and CIOs and CISOs on your website. You're just not. Those people are not going to fill out forms. They're going to reach out directly in some way, shape, or form, most likely. They're gonna find some direct relationship. So marketing's job ends up becoming a big part is enabling and empowering more scalable and more powerful outbound through content assets and things like live events and personal brand activation, etc. So that creates a whole other layer of complexity where now your measurement problem is potentially exacerbated by the need for sales process compliance in your CRM and logging activity appropriately and all that kind of fun stuff. So, John, I'll stop there. I know you've got stuff to add to it with your work with our clients. So where do we want to go from there?
Yeah. So a lot of what you had talked about is outside of what can be measured. It's podcast listens, people joining this LinkedIn Live. Like, we have no idea who's listening to this right now. It's posting on social media. There's a lot of external communication that the company has no visibility into who's actually engaging with it. So you can't use traditional click-based attribution models to determine which channels, which programs are quote unquote working or producing an ROI. So that's a huge problem with measurement. The other thing that what you described is there's no clear line between marketing source leads and sales source leads. Marketing and sales is working together to create these relationships and nurture these relationships along the way. So to create that line of, oh, we're going to just show ROI based off of the leads that marketing brought in, like, this new way of building relationships doesn't work like that. We can't think of sales versus marketing. It is one team working together to nurture these relationships along towards revenue. So that's kind of setting up the problem. What that then causes is executives have a hard time it's hard to get executive buy-in for these marketing programs that are they can't show a clear return on investment. You can't say, we need X amount of money to produce this podcast that we don't really know how it's going to, or we don't know how many leads are going to come in from just this podcast. So in a way, we need to flip the script on how we talk about these different programs. And we'll talk about that mind shift a little bit later. The other issue is that these programs, you can't you can't nurture a relationship overnight. And so these programs take a long time to mature. And so by the time they're actually starting to see some momentum, that's when executives tend to lose interest. They're not seeing immediate results, so they want to cut it off, divert that budget elsewhere. And so these programs never really come to fruition, and you never really see the results from them. It's a slow ramp up, but once you hit that kind of maturity, you start to see some exponential results from it.
Yeah, that's actually an important point to bring up too, because I think a lot of marketing teams exacerbate this issue by over reliance on multi-touch attribution, which, especially in complex B2B, whether you're selling to the enterprise or whether you're simply or just in an industry where it's a really complex and long sales cycle, that time lag that exists simply can't be measured by multi-touch attribution. It just can't. Forget the fact of multi-touch attribution obfuscates all what happens on the impression side of things. It's all click-based. But that time lag absolutely kills it because, look, most people clear their cookies at least a few times, right? And then that's that. And I know we're moving in a cookieless world, and there's some technology that's going to solve some of that. But even then, it's just that time lag that exists. These tools simply can't measure that linear. First of all, it's not a linear path, so there's that too. It's not this and then this, then this, then this, and this. it's all these pieces combined. Anyway, we don't need to keep belaboring that point, but I think by over reliance on multi-touch attribution, marketing teams actually exacerbate this issue because they can't prove the value. So then that adds to the frustration, that adds to the programs getting killed off early. And here we are.
Yep. That's a really good point. So the thing I want to talk about next is kind of the traditional way of people think about marketing and switching that mindset. There's been a lot of focus on marketing being accountable for revenue, which I 100% agree that marketing should be accountable for revenue, but how you think about that is really important. If you have revenue as the goal, then you start to focus on short-term tactics like lead gen that show kind of immediate results, but no impact on the business. If you flip the script and think of revenue as an outcome of marketing goals, then you start to focus on what are our marketing goals that we want to achieve that will then turn into revenue. Overarching here at Proofpoint, we say that the goal of marketing is to nurture relationships. But then you can get into some details and nuances of how you'd actually nurture those relationships, develop those relationships, get in front of the right people. And that's really what those marketing goals are that we want to establish so that we can tell a really good story as we're ramping up these programs. So you develop these marketing goals that address the challenges that you're seeing towards generating revenue. Develop some programs that address those challenges, and then explain to the executive team how those marketing programs all work together. Don't set it up as individual programs that you will expect results from each one individually, but they all work together towards achieving this goal. So that's a really important point to hone in on, is never present a program as a standalone one-off project. It's everything working together that's working towards that marketing goal.
And John, something else to bring up there too is these marketing goals, your marketing strategy. Make sure that it is tied to the business strategy and the business outcomes. It's got to be able to support both short-term and long-term. So, if in the short term, there's a business objective to improve margins, make sure that what you're doing in marketing is supporting that objective. Because if everything you're doing is strictly about top line revenue and that's actually going to cause your margins to decrease, guess what your CFO is going to say? No. Like, how is this going to support the thing that I need right now? It could be for a variety of reasons. It might be because that's what's been promised to the board or to investors, depending on the type of company you have. It might be because there's a goal to sell or get a buyout, whatever it is. Like, those are things that are really important for marketers to understand, because I can't even count the number of times that marketing seems to be done in a silo away from the rest of the business, where if you want to have a seat at the table, then you have to treat marketing as a core business function that supports the business.
Yes, that is a huge point. And CFOs will love you if you talk in their language of, it's not we're starting a podcast or we're sending out these emails. It's we're targeting these people. We are initiating this program in order to achieve this business objective. That's a really important mindset to have when you talk to executives. Talk in their language, not in a marketing language.
One of the, maybe just to throw in a couple other examples that we've seen over time that people should be considering, right? It might be like, is there a business strategy to what it might be expanding internationally, right? That might not be the most profitable thing in the short term, but that's a goal, that's an objective. And if your entire marketing strategy is strictly about, well, we're going to go after strictly just our lowest hanging fruit and drive the most revenue, within the markets that we currently have, and you're completely going to ignore, international expansion or something, well, that's a problem. Or there might be a product launch that's happening, and there's a specific goal of, all right, we want to get X amount of market share or whatever it might be with that new product or within a new industry or anything like that. Like, you have to make sure that what you're putting out there supports these types of business objectives.
Yes. So the main takeaway here is, yes, you're thinking about revenue, but it's how you're getting to revenue, which is going to allow you to tell a good story for a good revenue story. So the example of margins, increasing margins is going to increase revenue. And so telling that story of how you're increasing margins, which is a much easier story to tell through marketing programs, will then translate into revenue. So yeah, that's just a really important point to hone in on is, yes, revenue is important, but it's those marketing goals that are contributing to revenue that's really important to tell in your story. So we've outlined the problem. Now, what's the solution to all of this? So like I said, revenue, ultimate goal, but should not be what you focus on. There are a lot of indicators that show your progress towards hitting revenue goals that can help you tell a really good story as those programs are ramping up. Yeah, so Mike, I don't know if you have that the slide that our framework that you want to pull up.
Yes, let me pull that up. In the meantime, I know you had a couple of examples of telling that story that I think would be good to share. So why don't you do that, and I'll pull up this slide real quick.
Yeah, so Mike mentioned a few examples. Another one of telling a revenue story using marketing goals. Let's say you do an analysis of the past 5 years. You find out that the sales team is actually closing more deals. However, revenue is stagnant. You've done your analysis, you've seen this. And the reason why revenue is stagnant, even though we're winning more deals, is because ACV is starting to drop. So that's a challenge to revenue. So what a marketing goal could be is, we're going to establish programs to try to increase ACV by going after enterprise clients. So that's a whole complete shift in how we do marketing. We're going to be targeting enterprise clients more aggressively in order to increase our ACV over time. So with that, you can tell a really compelling story as you're building up towards getting enterprise clients to sign. You can, we'll go over some of those examples, but it's an easier story to tell of we're gaining market share with or website traffic from enterprise clients. Sales team is starting to get more conversations with enterprise clients. Like, that's an easier story to tell than, oh, we're just not hitting our revenue numbers, because those programs take a long time to ramp up.
All right, so this is how we generally will present to prospective clients, right? In terms of what are the expectations and how long is it going to take? What are we looking for? Things like that. John, I'll let you go from there.
Yeah, so if you've been following Proofpoint for a while, our framework is divided into 3 sections. First is building affinity with your target audience, converting that affinity into conversations, developing those conversations into relationships. You'll see at the top there's like a time frame, an expected time frame for each of these things to when we're starting to see results for them. Obviously, that changes based on the client, maturity of the marketing, things like that. But so when we first launch a program, the thing we're looking at is affinity. So some of the signals that let us know that we're building affinity in the market with this target audience is social engagement, both organic and through ads. Ads is a little bit easier to measure because you're targeting specifically that target audience. And so you can see, is this message resonating with the target audience? Are we seeing engagement affinity over time? The other thing that we look at heavily is an increase in branded search to the website. That's a huge indicator that people are becoming more and more interested in your brand and coming to the website on their own, not just directly from an ad. And then another big one is increase views to high intent pages. In the example that I gave of we're starting to target enterprise clients in order to increase the ACV, what we could do is layer in some MarTech that de-anonymizes account level website traffic so that we could see the companies coming to the website. And we could then track, is there an increase in enterprise clients coming to the website? If that's true, if that is happening, we can then, in our quarterly business review with the CFO, we can show that these programs are working towards our end goal of signing more enterprise clients, because enterprise clients are now starting to come to the website. They're learning about us. That's a good story to tell to establish buy-in with the executive team.
Yeah, and especially, John, one other thing to mention that we will often do is it allows you to connect the dots even better between some of the different channels, right? So you can start looking at patterns in, okay, we are seeing engagement in our organic, let's say, content from these people that are in this case, let's say enterprise, right? Then we can see in this, on the website, are these same companies or even these same people, depending on the tool you have access to, et cetera, are they also the ones coming to the site, right? Because then if that happens, now you can start saying, well, not only is the message resonating, it's resonating enough for them to come check us out and come to the site. Then you can say, are then these same people also looking at the high intent pages? So now they're showing intent, right? Even if they haven't filled out a form, let's just say. So you can start connecting these dots, and then I'm sure you're going to get to this, but if let's say we're seeing all this great affinity, but conversations aren't happening. Well, now you found, okay, well, our problem isn't with getting in front of the right people or getting them to recognize the pain of the problem. Our problem is actually starting conversations with them. Okay, how do we improve that piece? How do we turn this affinity into conversations better? We're missing something. So you can then start pinpointing the problems and having an effective conversation when things aren't working versus going, well, we did this thing and it didn't work, so there's no ROI, let's just kill the program. Because that's usually what happens if you're strictly relying on multi-touch attribution.
Yep, exactly. After 3 months, they see no revenue coming directly from this channel, they cut it.
Or no pipeline even. I mean, that's the big one, right?
Oh,
I think pipeline is the first one, but if they don't see it, they go, okay, well, it's not working. Let's kill it. When in reality, you might be on the right track. You're just maybe missing, maybe it could be little things. Maybe it's you need to throw in a scheduling link on your site to make it easy for them to schedule instead of going through a form. Maybe you need to improve, layer in some outbound to these people and these companies that are active and engaged. That's first party intent data you now have, right? All these kinds of things.
Yep, exactly. So going on to the next stage of conversations of how can we report to the executive team that these programs are working to generate conversations with the right people. The ways that we can measure that and show that it's working, obviously, if there's an increase in inbound conversations, inquiry forms, things like that, that's a great indication. However, with the strategy that we put together, there's a lot of outbound opportunity. And the way that you can measure that is just the response rate from outbound conversations. Yeah. If the sales team is starting to be able to have more conversations with the right people, or in the CRM, if you're able to rank the quality of those conversations, a lot of times we have like a cold, medium, warm, hot of how that lead is reacting to them. If you start to see more kind of like warm or hot conversations coming from the sales team, that's a great indication that the work you're doing in the front end is resulting in better sales conversations in the middle. So that's another way to indicate to the executive team that these programs are working. Yeah, anything else you wanted to add to that, Mike?
I think that last one's a really, really important one, because what you should start seeing is whatever. Again, it depends on the channels you're using, right? If you're using email, then your email response rate should increase, or your meeting set rate should increase. And that's the main one, but the response rates are going to be your either proxy or early indicator. If you're using LinkedIn, then your LinkedIn messages or outreach, or your comments that you're posting, might get responses that then, or a comment drives an inbound DM from somebody. Like, those are the things, and those are, again, they're a little bit harder to measure because there is no automated way necessarily to measure. Email, yes, like there's usually an email tie-in to the CRM. When it comes to LinkedIn messages, not as much, although, again, depending on what you have, you might be able to tie in if you're sending messages through Sales Navigator directly into Salesforce, let's just say, or something like that. And then there are ways to get that, but it's a little bit more, there's a little bit more tech. So you might need to, depending on the size of your team and the volume, the money to spend on the tech might not be worth it. And you might need to figure out a way to do it a little bit more manually. But either way, the data is there. You just need to know where to look and what to look for. And the last thing to add here in general, I think, is make sure that your measurement strategy, or the KPIs that you're using, are the right ones for the strategy that you've created. Meaning, if your focus, which ours almost always is, on increasing referrals, you need to be tracking referral KPIs. Meaning referral pipeline, ACV from referrals, pipeline velocity from referrals, referrals as a percentage of total. Those need to be your metrics, because that's a core piece of your go-to-market, right? And let's not forget, what's the business strategy? If the business strategy is increasing margin, then you better be reporting on things like margin from pipeline and overarching margin as that changes, and cost to acquire ideally decreasing because you're getting more referrals, and that improves margin. Like, those are the things that you need to be reporting on. Because what I see a lot is kind of these standard measurement playbooks, and everybody goes, okay, well, we need to report on, leads, lead to pipeline, pipeline to close, and pipeline velocity. Well, yeah, those are great, and you should be reporting on those, but you might be missing a lot of things that are actually really important based on what your strategy is.
Yeah, and that's also a very linear understanding of how someone becomes a customer. Is they become a lead, they become an opportunity, they close one. That is kind of shifting, especially post-pandemic. A lot of people are learning about companies. It takes several months to a year before they actually reach out. So they know about you, they're consuming your content, but they're not actually like engaging with your sales team until they feel like they trust and have confidence in what you have to deliver. So traditionally, that salesperson would have been able to contact them and have them in the CRM from the very beginning, but that has completely shifted to people do not want to reach out to sales until they are completely ready to have that sales conversation. So if you're missing all of that engagement and you're just cutting off programs because you're not seeing those conversations pipeline, close one up revenue, you're missing a huge chunk of what marketing is doing. So yeah, the one way that Mike and we like to talk about it is looking at the score box or the box score versus the scoreboard. Score in baseball, scoreboard would be like the runs, your points, and then the box score is the individual player's stats. And obviously, what wins the game is the points on the scoreboard, but what drives that score is how the individual players are performing. And so that's kind of what we're setting up, is you have to like analyze how those individual pieces are working together to create this scoreboard, this revenue, the ultimate goal of revenue. One way I like to think about it is, let's say the owner of a sports team went to the coach before the season, and the coach says, oh, the way we're going to become champions is we're going to score more points than the other team. Like, obviously, that's how it's done. So if you just have revenue as your marketing goal, you're missing the whole understanding of how marketing works. And if you don't measure all of those incremental indicators of how revenue is generated, you kind of miss the picture of what marketing is really doing.
Yeah, one other thing, John, that just kind of came to mind that I think is important to mention too is when, there are two, I think, distinct situations marketers are going to be in. One is prove out the value of things you've been doing. And the other one is make a business case for future investment. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to the future investment piece, an important part to understand is your finance team is going to be putting together a forecast. The forecast is going to be based on a number of assumptions. Going to be assumptions around margin, capital allocation, cost to acquire, and velocity, and all these kinds of things, right? So you need to understand as a marketer what those assumptions that they're making are, and use those as, number one, validate them. Like, well, hey, you're saying our margin is going to be this. We've never seen that before. How are we getting this? Or you're thinking our cost to acquire is going to decrease by whatever, 15%. Cool. I don't think that's doable based on whatever, right? And you have to be able to have these discussions internally to say, okay, well, if we're going to do that, here's what we need to do. And again, this gets back to marketing supporting business objectives and then having these feedback loops. So understanding these assumptions, I think, is really important as you're getting into budget planning season. And I think as marketing leaders, you also need to be distilling this down to your teams. So that your directors and managers know what these are, because they're going to be the ones helping you put together some of these numbers. And if they don't understand it, they might miss an important point around, oh, well, we need to ensure our cost to acquire is at this level or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay, so we've talked about what we need to measure. I guess the next point that we will need to go over is how we measure that. And that's where marketing operations comes in, because you can't just release a marketing program and expect all of the data just to be there for you to measure. You have to set up systems so that you can collect the right data, you have the right technologies in place. And a lot of times what gets missed is processes in place that people are doing in order to collect the right data. One of the biggest problems that we see is that we need sales to input information into the CRM in terms of who the lead is, something like key demographic things, but more importantly, where they are in the sales process, so that we can accurately measure these things. One for reporting purposes, but also for optimization purposes of what's working. How can we optimize our programs to increase performance? So yeah, I talked about some systems that we put in place. Website de-anonymization to see what companies are visiting your website is a big one. Obviously, having a CRM that's properly set up, the right fields that you're tracking, and a sales team that has a good process in place to measure, to input all the right information and workflows to progress leads into where they need to be. All that's really important. We actually have put together a checklist of what we recommend that companies set up. I don't know, Mike, if you have that, we can pull that up. Basically, it's just a checklist of like, do you have this? And there's also explanations as to what these tools are and why it's important for you to have them. So it includes tools, but it also includes processes of, are you doing these things within your CRM and whatnot? So we make this available to clients as we onboard them. We're also going to make this available just to anyone who wants it, so that you can go through and just kind of do a self-audit of your marketing operations, your tech stack, and how everything works together in order to measure these things that we're talking about. Mike, how do they get this?
So we will post a link to it on this thread. People can download it.
Perfect. Yeah. There's a lot in here. Not everything applies to every single company, but it's good just to like be aware that these things are available to you. And as you see a need arise, you can then try to implement it into your MOPS system.
John, you want to go through maybe a couple of core things that we often see missed that are kind of gotchas that people should be looking at?
Yeah. One of the biggest ones is just proper use of a CRM. A lot of times companies will set up a CRM and think that's it. Out of the box is good enough. But you have to fine tune it to your specific business needs and also to how marketing works. You want to be able to measure those marketing goals. You want to make sure that the CRM can talk to if you're achieving those marketing goals or not. Another big one within a CRM is capturing lost reason. That's a big one that can inform marketing messages and channels and audience. If you can understand why people are not signing or closing, becoming customers, you can have that's a gold mine of information to refine how you talk about the product or your service, who you're going after. If you find out that a specific industry or size of company wins at a higher rate than another, you can fine tune your target audience and your ICP off of that. So that's really important. And I recommend having two fields for close lost reason. One is a drop down that allows you to do kind of systematic reporting off of, but another is just an open field where the salesperson can just explain in detail what happened with this prospective customer and why the deal didn't close. From the category, if you realize that there's like a lot of deals being lost because of a certain category, you can dig into the details to understand the nuance as to what's going on there. Let's see. Marketing automation platform is an important one that allows for a lot of automation to happen with emails being sent out and tracking and tracking campaign source if like content is a big part of your marketing strategy. ABM software can be expensive, like 6 cents demand base. But if you are able to get that, it can be a really good source of information as to what accounts are engaging with what. Yeah, the website. GA4 is a new thing. That's a big one. Just got released, or just became official in July. Something I'm seeing is a lot of customers are just setting up GA4 with the default settings, and they're not getting a lot of the details that are specific to their company. So setting up custom events, setting up custom reports within GA4, and conversion tracking, so you can understand what channels and how people are converting on your website.
And then custom fields too, right? And if you're leveraging a IP de-anonymizer, you want to be collecting that data and being able to then understand who is visiting your various pages and seeing that directly in analytics, so that you can build your targeting lists off of that, for example, things like that.
Yep, exactly. A lot of the ABM software allows you to connect into Google Analytics so that you can pull in that account level data into GA4 and make really informed decisions, not just off of overall traffic, but specific industries or company sizes. Yeah, make some really good, get some really good insights off of that. Yeah.
All right, so we posted the link here. Go ahead and, if you're on LinkedIn, you can go ahead and grab it there. If you have any questions, you can reach out to us either on the checklist or anything else we talked about. John, anything else we missed? Maybe, I don't know. I think we covered pretty much.
Yeah,
everything.
I think we covered a lot. Yeah, I don't think there's anything else we need to talk about. Yeah,
I think really the core thing here is, as a marketer, you don't need to be a managerial finance expert or an accounting expert, but I think understanding some of the core concepts and understanding the core business metrics and finance metrics that CFOs are going to look at and care about, and not being afraid to have those conversations. I feel like in a lot of situations you see marketing and finance kind of like this, and the reality is they should be on the same page, and in a lot of situations they are, right? Mm-hmm. Both want the business to succeed. So coming at it from that perspective, and again, thinking like a CFO a little bit, is really the solution. And being able to set up business cases, setting clear expectations, right? Being able to tell that story and setting these clear expectations with, time-bound milestones. Hey, by X period, we should be seeing this. Mm-hmm. And we're going to learn X along the way and be able to adjust accordingly if we don't see this. Like if CFOs and executive leadership understands that, they're much more likely to buy in, especially if, as I mentioned before, those things support the overarching business strategy. So we'll leave it at that. And if anyone's got questions, reach out to John or I directly. Download the checklist if you need any help afterwards, or walking through things, or figuring out how to connect some of the tools together and make sure the data is flowing in the right way. John's happy to help, and we will see you all in a couple of weeks in the next Relationship-Led Growth Live. Thanks, John.